On September 1, 1974, a pilot named Major Brian Shul climbed into a cockpit wearing a pressure suit designed for space. His aircraft didn't have weapons, it couldn't turn quickly, it couldn't even fly slowly without falling out of the sky, but it could do something no other machine on Earth could do. It could outrun time. The SR-71 Blackbird holds a speed record that sounds impossible. New York to London, 1 hour, 54 minutes and 56 seconds. That's not a typo. A commercial flight today takes about 7 hours. The Concorde, back when it existed, took 3.5. The Blackbird did it in under 2 hours, flying so fast that friction heated its titanium skin to over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The airframe expanded so much during flight that fuel leaked out of the tanks while it sat on the runway. The plane had to be refueled in mid-air just minutes after takeoff because it was literally built too hot to hold fuel on the ground. This is a story about what happens when a government decides physics is negotiable. Let's rewind to 1960. The Soviet Union just shot down Gary Powers in his U-2 spy plane over Sverdlovsk. Eisenhower lied about it on live television. Khrushchev produced the wreckage and the pilot at a press conference in Moscow. The entire American intelligence apparatus suddenly had a problem. Their primary reconnaissance platform could be killed by missiles. The Cold War was entering a new phase where seeing your enemy wasn't enough. You had to see them and survive. The CIA went to Lockheed's Skunk Works division with a question that sounded insane. Can you build a plane that flies too fast to be shot down? Not evasive, not stealthy, just physically faster than a missile could catch it. Kelly Johnson, the engineer running Skunk Works, said yes. But the requirements he laid out read like science fiction. The plane would cruise at Mach 3.2, over 2,000 miles per hour, at 85,000 feet, higher than most missiles could reach. It would need to survive air temperatures that would melt aluminum. Its engines would need to function in air so thin that conventional turbines couldn't generate thrust. And it would need to do all of this for hours at a time, over hostile territory, with no support. The solution was titanium. Lots of it, 93% of the airframe. The problem was that in 1960, almost nobody knew how to work with titanium at scale. It's brittle. It catches fire easily. Conventional tools couldn't shape it. Lockheed had to invent new manufacturing processes just to build the thing. They had to smuggle titanium out of the Soviet Union through shell companies because that's where most of the world's supply came from. The CIA was literally buying metal from the enemy to build a spy plane named at them. Then there were the engines. Pratt & Whitney designed the J-58 turbojet specifically for the Blackbird, and it remains one of the most complex engines ever built. At low speeds it functioned like a normal jet engine, but above Mach 2, the inlet cones moved backward and the engine transitioned into essentially a ramjet. At top speed, 80% of the thrust came not from the turbine but from the shape of the inlet itself, compressing air so violently it ignited without fuel. The engine breathed fire. The fuel was a chemical called JP7, developed specifically because regular jet fuel would explode at the temperatures the Blackbird generated. JP7 is so stable you can drop a lit match into it and the match will go out. To ignite it in the engine, Lockheed had to inject triethylboron, a chemical so volatile it bursts into flame. On contact with air, every time the SR-71 started its engines, it was a controlled explosion. Here's where it gets strange. The Blackbird couldn't take off with full fuel tanks because the fuel would leak out. The gaps between the titanium panels were designed to seal only when the metal expanded from heat. So the plane would take off partially fueled, meet a tanker almost immediately, and top off once it was hot. Pilots described watching fuel stream out onto the runway before flight. This wasn't a flaw, it was intentional. The plane was designed to leak. Once it reached operational speed and altitude, the Blackbird entered a regime of flight where normal rules stopped applying. The air outside was thin enough to see stars in daylight. The friction-heated skin glowed. The pilots could see the curvature of the Earth, and because the plane was moving so fast relative to the ground, time itself started behaving differently. This is where the math gets uncomfortable. The Blackbird flew fast enough that relativistic time dilation became measurable. Not much, a few microseconds per flight, but measurable. Atomic clocks aboard the aircraft ticked slower than identical clocks on the ground. Einstein's equations weren't theoretical anymore. They were operational considerations. Pilots returning from missions were younger by a nearly imperceptible amount than the people who watched them take off. Let's talk about what this machine actually did. The SR-71 flew reconnaissance missions over North Vietnam, North Korea, Cuba, Libya, and anywhere else the US needed photographs but couldn't risk a shootdown. It was untouchable. The Soviets fired over 1,000 missiles at Blackbirds during the Cold War. None hit. Not because the missiles missed, because the plane was faster than the intercept solution. By the time a missile reached where the plane had been, the Blackbird was already miles ahead. There's a famous radio call from an SR-71 pilot named Brian Shul. He was flying over Southern California when a Navy F-18 pilot radioed air traffic control and asked for a speed check. The controller reported 400 and something knots. Then an F-4 Phantom pilot asked for his speed. Faster, maybe 500 knots. Then Shul's partner in the SR-71 keyed the Mach and asked for their speed. The controller paused and said, "Blackbird, I show you at 1,842 knots across the ground. That's Mach 2.8, over 2,000 miles per hour. And the Blackbird wasn't even trying." Shul said the silence on the radio afterward was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. But here's the part nobody talks about. The SR-71 cost roughly $34 million per unit in 1960s money. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $300 million today. The operational cost per flight hour was somewhere between $200,000 and $400,000 depending on who's counting. It required a ground crew of hundreds. Every mission needed multiple aerial refuelings. The J-58 engines had to be rebuilt constantly. The entire program was an engineering miracle that burned money like JP-7, and in 1998, the Air Force retired it. Why? Because satellites got good enough. A billion-dollar reconnaissance satellite stays in orbit for years, sees everything, and doesn't need a pilot. The SR-71 was the fastest thing humans ever built with people inside, and it became obsolete not because someone built something faster, but because someone built something that didn't need to move at all. Except that's not entirely true. The Blackbird could do something satellites couldn't. It could change course. It could respond to orders in real time. It could photograph a target right now, not in 6 hours when the satellite's orbit brought it overhead. In 1999, a year after the retirement, NASA briefly brought a few SR-71s back for research. And after 9/11, there were serious proposals to reactivate the fleet for tactical reconnaissance over Afghanistan. The proposals went nowhere. The tooling was gone. The expertise was retired. The infrastructure had been dismantled. You can't unretire a program this complex. So now the fastest plane never built sits in museums. You can walk up and touch the titanium skin. You can look into the cockpit where pilots wore spacesuits and watch the sky turn purple. You can read the placards about Mach 3 and 85,000 feet and fuel that leaked on purpose. What you can't do is explain to someone in simple terms why we don't build things like this anymore. The usual answer is cost, and that's partially true. But the real answer is weirder. We stopped building machines like the SR-71 because we stopped asking questions that required them. The Blackbird existed because someone asked. If a plane could outrun a missile and a room full of engineers decided to find out, it didn't matter that it was expensive or complicated or borderline impossible. It mattered that nobody had done it before. Modern engineering is more cautious, more iterative, more focused on incremental improvements to proven designs, which makes sense. It's efficient. It's cost-effective. It reduces risk. But it also means we probably won't see another SR-71. Not because we can't build one, because we've optimized ourselves out of asking that kind of question. There's a photo from 1990 of an SR-71 doing a flyby at an air show. The plane is inverted, upside down, flying past the crowd at 500 miles per hour just for show. The pilot, Ed Yielding, said later he did it because he wanted people to see what the machine could do before it was gone. He wanted them to remember that we used to build things that leaked fuel and broke physics and made time run slower, just to prove we could. The Blackbird's official speed record still stands, 36 years and counting. There's no plane in development that will break it. No program in the pipeline. The fastest we ever flew is the fastest we'll probably ever fly, and every year that record gets older, the gap between what we did and what we're willing to try gets wider. The engineers who built the Blackbird are dying, the pilots are retiring, the institutional knowledge is fading. One day, someone will look at that speed record and genuinely wonder if it's real. If we really built a plane that outran missiles and bent time and leaked fuel on purpose because that's how fast it needed to go. They'll wonder if maybe the numbers are exaggerated, if maybe it wasn't quite as impossible as it sounds, and the only answer will be the planes in the museums, sitting silent, their skins still scarred from heat they'll never feel again.